Colombian senators held a debate on the peace process and questioned the international policy of the Iván Duque government. Peaceful demonstrations have continued across the United States for the 8th consecutive day in the wake of George Floyd's murder. The Zimbabwean government summoned the US ambassador to the country following accusations that Zimbabwe was one of several countries interfering in the ongoing protests in the United States. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. We start in Colombia, where senators summoned the country's foreign minister and the High Commissioner for Peace to a debate on government initiatives that they said could encourage possible international conflicts. The senators demanded explanations from President Iván Duque about the upcoming arrival of US military personnel in the country, who, according to the government, will allegedly be advisors in the fight against drug trafficking. Legislators stressed that this violates the Colombian Constitution and the nation's sovereignty. Likewise, several Colombian social sectors have warned that the US troops have the goal of intensifying Washington's attacks on Venezuela. And the Senate Commission also debated peace in the country, including the implementation of the 2016 peace accords and the responsibilities of the state. Senators Iván Cepeda and Antonio Sanguino accused the High Commissioner for Peace, Miguel Ceballos, of promoting the undoing of the accords signed by the FARC armed group, for which reason they will start a legal case against him. And during the virtual session, Colombian Senator Iván Cepeda denounced that President Iván Duque's foreign policy responds to the interests of the United States.
The current government's foreign policy has been aimed at promoting dangerous initiatives that brings us closer to an international armed conflict. It seeks to undermine the peace process in Colombia, and that has undoubtedly led to the inclusion of one of the countries, if not the main country, that has contributed the most to reach a bloodless solution to the armed conflict. I must say that never before has our country been so down on its knees, so subjected to the United States policy as we are today.
Meanwhile, Colombian Senator Aida Araya criticized the support of Iván Duque's government for the economic, financial and commercial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba.
Before, the only two countries that voted in favor of the blockade against Cuba were the United States and Israel. And now they have found two wonderful allies, Mr. Bolsonaro, who is destroying Brazil, and Mr. Duque here. And for me, it seems very regrettable, an attitude that is rejected by more than 50 international representatives. But besides people who contributed to peace, really in an international body, the United States imposed, then the Colombian government accompanies it in an absolutely servient way against Latin America. I do believe that we must say another thing. The third point fulfilled by the Foreign Ministry is that the peace agreements must be destroyed. So they try by all means to do it. This is a very deplorable situation.
The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres welcomed Bolivia's decision to postpone general elections in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, as he made a call to parties and authorities to cooperate in order to undertake peaceful, transparent and inclusive elections in September. Bolivia's Electoral Tribunal announced on Tuesday that the elections to replace the de facto government that installed itself after the coup against President Evo Morales, which were originally scheduled for May 3rd, are now set to take place on September 6th. Tribunal President Salvador Romero explained this as part of a pre-agreement reached with almost all presidential candidates except the leader of the Santa Cruz Civic Committee, Fernando Camacho. Meanwhile, Luis Arce, the presidential candidate of the Movement Towards Socialism, stressed on Twitter that only a legitimate government can resolve the health, economic and social crisis that the country is currently experiencing. Authorities in some of the main cities in Bolivia have suspended the quarantine and returned to a relative normality. Nonetheless, the number of COVID-19 cases continues to rise across the country.
In the first day after the quarantine was lifted, The city of La Paz saw increased movement on the streets as people returned to work after 70 days in isolation.
It's been difficult. I was stuck at home for nearly 3 months, and today was the first time I could reopen my business. We only need to take care of each other now.
Many of us need to go out and work because our children are hungry. I am a handyman, so I must find work.
Across Bolivia, most businesses and institutions are operating, except for schools. Public transport can only be used at half capacity, and face masks are obligatory.
Mantengan distancia.
We are making sure people do not crowd the spaces, that social distancing is maintained. We're controlling public transport, so they follow the new rules.
Social distancing, face masks, and all biosecurity measures are being enforced. We are also controlling the amount of people inside each unit to prevent the virus from spreading.
For many who live on their day-by-day earnings, the end of the quarantine means starting from zero.
We are in ruins, without work. We need to find work again, for our children. We need to persevere. We also need to care for ourselves, because everything else is gone.
The return to normal is also placing increased responsibility on the de facto government, as COVID-19 cases continue to mount and the number of tests is minimal.
Hundreds of Peruvian, Colombian and Bolivian citizens have been camping in front of their embassies in the Chilean capital, Santiago, urging the governments of their home countries to assist them to return home. As Chile continues to face an economic crisis aggravated by the coronavirus pandemic, many people, including foreign nationals living and working in the country, have stressed they're unable to support their families. Faced with a difficult situation, migrants are hoping governments will arrange transport to be repatriated to their home countries. In the meantime, these families, including many with small children, are forced to wait in tents.
I've been here for more than 2 weeks, 10 days, and we are asking for help in the consulate from Bolivia to go to our country, because here we have no one. The pandemic. That is the reason for the lack of jobs, and the borders were closed, and there is no way to leave, and there is a great need of our people. As you can see, we are more than 250.
A new phase of easing of the lockdown is set to begin in the Brazilian city of Rio de Janeiro, despite the rising numbers of COVID-19 cases and fatalities. Rio Mayor Marcelo Crivella announced the beginning of the implementation of a gradual plan consisting of the reopening of economic, social and recreational sectors. The official also reported that the plan will be divided into 6 phases of lockdown de-escalation. Meanwhile, the governor of Sao Paulo State, João Doria, recently announced the gradual reopening of economic activities from this Monday. The 2 states are the most populated regions of the country and also the worst hit by the novel coronavirus. Brazil has the highest average number of COVID-19 deaths worldwide, while its caseload is only second to the United States. Venezuelan Vice President for Communications Jorge Rodriguez offered an update on the coronavirus figures in the country this Tuesday.
Until today, we have 1,819 cases, with 334 recovered patients, 977 hospitalized, 475 admitted to comprehensive diagnostic centers, only 15 admitted in private clinics, and Venezuela has reported 18 deaths until today, with one of the lowest mortality rates in the world, under 1%.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. A CARICOM electoral observer mission was set to leave Suriname on Tuesday, having reported that the recent elections were free, fair, transparent and credible. The mission spent 2 weeks in Suriname, where it monitored the general elections held on May 25th, as well as the pre- and post-election phases, and reported no evidence of fraud. The observer mission highlighted the transparency of the country's electoral system, pointing out that at every stage of the process, representatives of different political parties were allowed to scrutinise the proceedings. Trinidad and Tobago will resume economic activities as part of a plan to reopen the country. Retail stores, malls and professional services will resume business operations. Public servants will be required to work on a rotational basis, while taxi drivers must continue to operate at 50% capacity. Prime Minister Keith Rowley also announced the reopening of beaches, river resorts and sporting activities starting June 21st, but no decision has yet been made on casinos, bars and cinemas or places of worship. Since the pandemic started, the nation has reported 117 cases of COVID-19 and 8 deaths. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season officially began on Monday, presenting a further challenge to the fight against the novel coronavirus pandemic. The forecast for 2020 suggests a slightly above average hurricane season, including 13 to 19 named storms, of which 6 to 10 could become hurricanes. Grenadian Minister of State Winston Garraway noted that the arrival of a hurricane in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic would aggravate disaster management, health and security challenges. Meanwhile, authorities in Barbados announced new protocols would be put in place at hurricane shelters and rescue teams would be provided with proper protective equipment to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Over 15 hurricanes hit the North Atlantic area last year. Peaceful demonstrations have continued across the United States in the wake of George Floyd's murder last week. Thousands of protesters spent around 5 hours marching north through Manhattan as demonstrations against police brutality continue in New York City. Meanwhile, curfews have been announced again in several cities including Philadelphia, Washington, Atlanta, Chicago and Los Angeles. On Tuesday, the state of Minnesota filed a civil rights charge against the Minneapolis Police Department to launch an investigation into the death of George Floyd at the hands of the police. Former officer Derek Chauvin, who pinned Floyd to the ground, was initially expected in court on Monday. However, the appearance has been rescheduled for June 8th. And on the 8th consecutive day after the death of George Floyd, downtown Washington saw the deployment of military trucks as demonstrators began assembling for another protest. Meanwhile, in Ohio, demonstrators held a mass dying 1 week after George Floyd died in police custody. Protesters lay face down in front of the state capitol building. And George Floyd's death has sparked worldwide protests against police brutality and racism. On Tuesday, police in Paris banned a demonstration planned in memory of Adama Traore, a 24-year-old black man who died in a 2016 police operation, which some have likened to Floyd's murder. However, around 20,000 people defied the ban and took to the streets, where they were met with tear gas and rubber bullets. Violent protests broke out in France in 2016 after Adama Traore's death. His family blamed excessive use of force during his arrest when a 24-year-old was pinned down by 3 police officers. And France entered the second phase of the lifting of its lockdown this Tuesday, which includes the removal of restrictions on movement and the reopening of restaurants and cafes. However, in Paris, where the outbreak remains more active than in the rest of mainland France, such services will be limited to outside terraces. France now ranks 8th in the world in terms of the number of coronavirus cases reported. Heavy rains have hit several regions of South China's Guangdong province and southwest Chongqing municipality, flooding cities and causing other natural disasters. Local authorities issued a red alert for storms early on Tuesday, downgrading it to level 4 flood control and level 3 emergency response shortly after. The extreme weather forced the closure of local schools and flooded streets in the urban areas of Yangqiang and villages in the rural region. Students returned to school in Singapore on Tuesday, while some workplaces reopened as coronavirus restrictions were eased. Singapore initially kept infections low through a strict regime of testing and contact tracing. However, the country has recorded over 30,000 cases, the highest official tally in Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, the death toll stands at 24. Authorities imposed a partial lockdown in early April, with people only allowed to leave their homes for essential purposes.
And also before that, the teachers has also placed designated seatings on all the chairs and tables. So this is to ensure that children know where exactly they are supposed to be and will minimize children's movement in the classrooms and within the center.
And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo sent his condolences to the family of George Floyd and described his death at the hands of US police as unfortunate and tragic. The president made the statement on his Twitter account, adding that black people the world over were shocked by the killing of the unarmed man, while noting that it was an ugly reminder of the problem of systematic racism in the United States. He also expressed hope that the death of George Floyd would inspire a lasting change in how the US confronts the problems of hate and racism. The statement comes after the African Union Commission chairperson condemned the brutal killing and called on US authorities to intensify efforts to ensure the elimination of all forms of discrimination based on race or ethnic origin. People protested outside the US Embassy in the Kenyan capital Nairobi on Tuesday, expressing solidarity with the ongoing anti-racism protests in the US following the police murder of George Floyd.
I'm here because I believe that when you are silent, you are part of the oppressor. And I am a privileged white woman from the US, and it is my responsibility to be speaking up against what is happening right now to black people around the world, but especially in the country I come from. And the way that the country I come from treats this world too, this part of the world is not okay, and we need to speak up against that.
The Zimbabwean government has summoned US Ambassador Brian Nichols to respond over claims made by a senior US official that Zimbabwe was one of several countries interfering in the ongoing protests in the United States. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien yesterday told US media that Zimbabwe, together with China, Russia and Iran, were foreign adversaries who are trying to take advantage of the anti-racist protests in the United States to interfere in its internal affairs. According to Zimbabwean government officials, Ambassador Nichols was reminded that Zimbabwe respects the United Nations Charter, which requires all members to respect the territorial integrity and political independence of all states. Mali produced 700,000 tonnes of cotton in the 2019 to 2020 season, around 6.6% more than the previous year, according to the state-owned Malian Company for Textile Development. Mali is one of 4 cotton producers in sub-Saharan Africa, alongside Chad, Benin and Burkina Faso. According to Chief Executive Baba Berth, the state company's target for next season is 820,000 tonnes. Mali's cotton season runs from April to March in 2 phases, production between May and June and September and October, and a harvesting and marketing phase that runs from October or November to the end of March.
Textile Developments Initiative to pay the producers on time.
Health authorities in Morocco and Tunisia confirmed more cases of the novel coronavirus on Tuesday as both countries continue to struggle against the pandemic. In Morocco, the Health Ministry has confirmed 26 new cases, pushing the total close to 8,000 as the death toll surged to 202. Meanwhile, Tunisia's Health Ministry has announced the number of cases rose to more than 1,000 and the death toll from the virus now stands at 48. Morocco and Tunisia are 2 of the worst-hit countries in northwest Africa, only surpassed by Algeria, the 4th hardest-hit nation in the continent. Mozambique's Defence Minister Jaime Neto reported that 2 top leaders of the Al-Shabaab armed group have been killed. Both were Tanzanians, and one had led the first attack against Mocimboa da Praia in October 2017. The news comes as the Cabo Delgado provincial governor told reporters on Sunday that calm was returning to Macomia and the surrounding villages following a terrorist attack by the group, and some people who had fled were now returning to their homes. Al-Shabaab fighters caused serious damage in Macomia, where an electricity substation was destroyed, cutting off power to all the northern districts of Cabo Delgado, while also burning down a number of buildings. Authorities in Bangladesh have reported close to 3,000 new coronavirus cases over the past 24 hours. This massive surge in infections brings the total number of cases to over 52,000, with more than 700 deaths since the outbreak began. Bangladesh was also hit by Cyclone Amphan in May in the midst of the pandemic. Authorities have decided to divide the country into 3 coloured zones, red, yellow and green, taking into account the incidence of new COVID-19 cases. The UN mission to Libya has said that the nation's warring parties have agreed to restart ceasefire talks after weeks of intense fighting near the capital, Tripoli. In a statement posted online, the United Nations support mission in Libya said it welcomed the plan to resume talks based on earlier so-called 5+5 military commission meetings involving 5 senior officers appointed by each side. 2 ceasefires had already been agreed to this year, but both shelling and fighting have continued. Foreign intervention has reportedly raised the stakes, with a flow of increasingly powerful weapons being delivered to both sides by their allies. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.